The alarm on my console screamed before I even understood why. Red light filled the cabin, bouncing off the metal walls of our ship, and for a moment I thought we were the ones under attack. Then the signal came through, garbled and broken, carried across half a star system by a dying relay tower. It was a voice, small, shaking, speaking in a language my translator struggled to keep up with. "Please, someone, anyone, we are not a threat to you, we only want to live." I froze at my station, my hand still hovering over the controls. Around me, the bridge crew went silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Noah Bright, our engineer, stopped typing mid-sentence. Grace Miller, our medic, turned from the side panel where she had been checking supply readings, her face pale under the cabin lights. The voice belonged to a HFY elder. I had read about them once, in a report nobody in the fleet took seriously. A small species, gentle by nature, living on a quiet world 3 jumps from where we were stationed. They had no warships, no weapons fleets, no armies. They spent their lives studying stars and healing sick soil so their crops would grow taller. They had never harmed anyone. Now their planet was surrounded. The Voran ascendancy had arrived in full force, a swarm of warships blotting out the stars above the HFY homeworld. I had heard of the Voran before, the way you hear about a storm 3 towns over, not close enough to worry about, not yet, but now their fleet sat in high orbit above a planet that had no way to fight back, and their intentions were clear from the first transmission alone. "They are taking our cities," the HFY elder said, her voice cracking. "They say we have resources they need. We have offered to share. We have offered anything. They do not want to share. They want to take." I looked at Daniel Ross, our pilot, who sat frozen at the helm, jaw tight, eyes locked on the screen showing the distress call's origin point. None of us said anything, because there was nothing simple to say. We were a small ship, built for escort duty and supply runs, not for standing between a planet and an invading fleet. But it was not our decision to make, not officially. Our vessel was under strict order, bound by treaty, forbidden from acting without permission from the Galactic Concord, the council of older species that ran most of known space. Humanity had only recently earned a seat at their table, and it had cost us years of patience, years of proving we could be trusted, years of holding our tongues in rooms full of species who looked at us like children who had wandered into an adult meeting. If we moved without their approval, we would lose everything we had worked for. If we did nothing, an entire species would disappear from the stars. "Command," I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "Patch me through to Concord Central." Now. Sophie Lane, our communications officer, was already ahead of me, her fingers flying over the console. "Trying," she said. "Channels are jammed. Every ship in range is trying to reach them at once." Of course they were. Word had already spread. This was not a secret the galaxy could pretend not to notice. A planet was screaming for help, and everyone with an ounce of decency wanted an answer from the people whose job it was to give one. I sat there, watching the numbers on the display tick upward. Population count, estimated casualties, time remaining before critical failure of the planet's primary shield grid. Every second the number changed, it changed for the worse. "Come on," I muttered under my breath. "Somebody answer them." The HFY elder's voice returned, weaker this time. "Our shields will not hold through the night. Our children are asking why no one is coming. I do not know what to tell them anymore." I felt something in my chest twist, sharp and sudden, like a wire pulled too tight. Grace stepped closer to me, arms folded, staring at the same numbers I was. "Kale," she said quietly, using my first name instead of my rank, which she only did when things were serious. "Tell me the Concorde is already moving. Tell me somebody up there is doing something." I did not answer her, because I did not know. Hours passed like that. We stayed locked onto the signal, listening as more voices joined the first one. Not soldiers, not warriors, teachers, farmers. A voice that sounded like a young child asking her mother if the stars were falling. Every transmission chipped away at something inside me, that I did not know could still break. Then, finally, word came through from Concord Central, relayed through official channels in cold, careful language. The council was convening. A vote would be held. A decision would come in time. In time. I read those words 3 times before I let myself believe what I already knew. In time meant slow. In time meant cautious. In time meant a room full of ambassadors debating procedure while a planet burned in real time, light years away, powerless to do anything but wait. Daniel slammed his hand against the console, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough that everyone flinched. "They are voting," he said, disbelief thick in his voice. "There are people down there right now, begging for their lives, and the biggest minds in the galaxy are voting. That is how it works," Noah said quietly, though he did not sound like he believed it either. "There are treaties, boundaries. If we act without permission, we could start something bigger, something none of us can control. And if we do nothing," I said, my voice low, "we already know how this ends." Nobody argued with that. I turned back to my station and opened a private channel, one meant only for encrypted communication between fleet officers and their families. My hands were steady, but my mind was anything but. On the other end of that channel was my sister, Laura Cole, humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Concord. If anyone in that chamber was fighting for the Aetheri, it would be her. I sent a single message, 4 words. "Is help coming, Laura?" The response did not come right away. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though the clock told me otherwise. I watched the Aetheri distress signal continue to update on my screen, the numbers growing worse with every passing moment, and I felt something cold settle into my stomach, something that told me the answer before it ever arrived. When my sister's reply finally came through, it was short, coded, careful, the kind of message meant to slip past anyone listening in who should not be. "Vote is not going our way. I am trying. Stay ready. Stay ready." I stared at those 2 words longer than I should have, feeling the weight of everything they were not saying. My sister was not the kind of person who gave up easily, and if she was telling me to stay ready, it meant she already knew what the outcome would be, and she was preparing me for a choice that had not officially been made yet. Grace watched my face, and must have seen something there, because she stepped closer again. What did she say? "She said stay ready," I answered, closing the channel. The bridge fell quiet again, except for the low, steady hum of our ship's engines and the faint, broken static of the Aetheri distress call still playing in the background, a reminder that somewhere out there, a whole world was waiting on people who were arguing about rules instead of saving lives. I thought about the child's voice again, asking her mother if the stars were falling. I thought about my sister, standing alone in a room full of ambassadors who valued caution over conscience. I thought about the words "in time" and how quickly that phrase could become too late. Then the final transmission came through, and it was not a voice this time. It was silence, a long, heavy silence, followed by a burst of static, and then nothing at all. The signal that had been steady for hours simply stopped, cutting off mid-sentence, as if someone had reached out to speak and never finished. Sophie's hands froze over her console. "I lost the signal," she said. "I lost the entire relay." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The bridge lights hummed overhead, and the silence pressed in around us like something physical, something that made it hard to breathe. I looked at the empty space on the screen where the Aetheri elder's voice used to be, and I understood, in that moment, exactly what my sister's message had meant. Stay ready. Because somewhere out there, a decision had already been made, whether the Concord admitted it or not, and it had not been made in that council chamber. It had been made the second that signal went dark, the second an entire people's plea for help was met with silence instead of an answer. I turned to my crew, and for the first time since the alarm had gone off, my voice came out steady. "Get the ship ready," I said. "We are not waiting for permission anymore." The Concord chamber was built to make everyone inside it feel small. Tall glass walls curved upward into a domed ceiling, and rows of seats rose in tiers around a central platform, each one holding a delegate from a different corner of the galaxy. My sister told me once that the room was designed that way on purpose, so that no single voice could ever rise above the rest. In theory, it was meant to represent fairness. In practice, it meant that urgent decisions moved at the pace of the slowest, most cautious mind in the room. Laura stood at the center platform, alone, facing rows of delegates who watched her with expressions ranging from polite sympathy to outright boredom. She had already spoken once, laying out the facts as plainly as she could. The Etheri were unarmed. The Voran ascendancy was not. Every hour of delay cost lives that could not be brought back. It had not been enough. Ambassador Cole, said the presiding delegate, an elder from a species known for their calm, methodical way of speaking. We understand your concern, but the Concord cannot act on emotion alone. Intervention carries consequences. If we move against the Voran without proper process, we risk provoking a larger conflict that could cost far more lives than the ones we are trying to save. They are already dying, Laura said, her voice tight but controlled. While we discuss process, an entire species is being erased from the stars. Tell me what process is worth more than that. A murmur passed through the chamber, but it was the kind of murmur that meant discomfort, not agreement. Several delegates shifted in their seats. One near the back exhaled sharply, as if her words had been an inconvenience rather than a plea. We sympathize, another delegate said, from a species with long silver limbs and eyes that never seemed to blink. But sympathy is not strategy. The Voran ascendancy is not a small threat. Their fleet numbers are significant. If the Concord commits forces and fails, it sends a message of weakness to every hostile power watching. We must consider the larger picture. The larger picture, Laura repeated, and for a moment I could hear the disbelief in her voice even through the recording Sophie had managed to pull from the public feed. The larger picture is a planet full of people who have never harmed anyone, calling for help, and receiving nothing but careful words about risk. The presiding delegate folded his hands. A vote will be held, he said, as is required by Concord law. The vote came quickly after that, each delegate casting their decision through the chamber's central display. I watched the numbers appear one by one, and with every new mark against intervention, I felt something in my chest sink lower. 14 votes against, 1 vote for. My sister stood alone on that platform, the only voice in the entire chamber that had chosen action over caution, and even she must have known, standing there, that it would not be enough to change what was coming. The presiding delegate spoke again, his tone final. The Concord will not authorize direct intervention at this time. We will continue diplomatic efforts to reach a resolution with the Voran ascendancy. Diplomatic efforts, as if diplomacy meant anything to a fleet that had already begun taking cities. Laura did not argue further. She simply nodded once, turned from the platform, and walked out of the chamber without another word. I imagined her in the hallway outside, alone, carrying the weight of 14 votes against everything she believed in. That was when the second message came through to me. Longer this time, sent through a private channel meant only for family. I fought for them, Kale. It was not enough. The Concord will not move. I cannot order you to break protocol. I cannot even suggest it without risking my position and yours. But I know you. I know what you will decide before you decide it. Do what is right. Do what is right. I read those words standing in the middle of our bridge, my crew gathered around me, waiting. I had already made up my mind before her message ever arrived, but seeing it written out, knowing my sister understood exactly what those words meant, gave me something I had not expected. It gave me permission I never needed but wanted anyway. I looked around at my crew. Noah stood near the engineering console, arms crossed, waiting for my word. Grace had already begun pulling emergency medical supplies from storage, as if she had known this decision was coming before I made it. Daniel sat at the helm, hands resting lightly on the controls, ready to move the second I gave the order. Sophie watched me from her station, steady, patient, the calmest person on the ship despite everything. We are not a warship, I said, my voice carrying across the bridge. We do not have the firepower to fight the Voran fleet directly, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But we have something they do not expect. We have people down there who need rescuing, and we have a ship fast enough to reach them if we move now, before the Concord finds a way to stop us. They will call this treason, Noah said, not as a warning, but as a fact he needed spoken aloud before he committed to it. They might, I agreed, but I would rather answer for helping people than for standing by while they died. Nobody argued. Daniel turned to his console, fingers already moving across the controls. Setting a course for the Etheri system, he said. If we cut through the outer relay points instead of the main travel lanes, we can avoid Concord monitoring stations for most of the journey. It will take longer, but it keeps us hidden until we are already committed. Do it, I said. Sophie raised a hand slightly, her expression careful. If we cut communications with Concord Central, there is no coming back from that quietly. Once we go dark and change course, everyone will know exactly what we decided to do. Then let them know, I said. I would rather they know the truth than pretend we did nothing while we secretly wished we had done more. I gave the order, and our small ship broke formation from the human fleet patrol line, engines burning brighter, as we shifted course away from the safe, sanctioned travel corridors and toward the one place in the galaxy the Concord had decided was not worth saving. The first few hours were quiet in a way that made my skin crawl. No alarms, no warnings, just the steady hum of the engines and the occasional soft beep of navigation updates as we moved further from friendly territory and deeper into space, controlled by nobody but the ships willing to fight for it. Grace worked in the medical bay, preparing supplies for injuries we had not yet encountered but knew were coming. Noah ran diagnostics on every system twice over, checking for weaknesses in our shields, our hull integrity, anything that might fail us when we needed it most. Daniel kept his hands on the controls even when there was nothing to steer, as if staying ready meant staying in motion. I sat at my station, watching the empty space ahead of us, and let myself think, just for a moment, about what we were risking. Careers, reputations, possibly our lives. Humanity had fought hard for its place among the galaxy's older species, and what we were doing now could undo years of careful diplomacy in a single decision. But I kept coming back to the same thought, over and over, no matter how I tried to reason my way around it. A child had asked her mother if the stars were falling, and nobody with the power to stop it had answered her. We might not have been able to change the outcome for everyone, but we could change it for someone, and in that moment, that felt like the only decision worth making. Sophie's voice broke the silence, sharper now, carrying a warning I had been expecting since we left friendly space. Kale, we have a problem. Sensors are picking up movement ahead of us, still distant, but closing. Voran? I asked. Scout formation, she confirmed. 3 ships, smaller than the main fleet, likely watching the outer perimeter for exactly this kind of thing. I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the sudden, sharp awareness that the quiet part of our journey had just ended. They have not spotted us yet, Sophie continued, but at our current course and speed, that will not last long. Daniel glanced back at me, waiting for the order. Noah stopped what he was doing, hand hovering over the shield controls. Grace appeared in the doorway of the medical bay, watching me with the same steady patience she always carried, even now. I thought about my sister, standing alone on that platform, refusing to back down even when the vote had already turned against her. I thought about the silence that had swallowed the Etheri distress signal, and how badly I wanted to reach that planet before silence became permanent for everyone left alive down there. Hold course, I said. We are not turning back now. The scout ships grew closer on our display, 3 small points of light against the dark, and somewhere beyond them, past the blockade the Voran had built around an entire world, people were still waiting for someone, anyone, to answer their call for help. We had already decided we would be the ones to try. The 3 scout ships closed in faster than Sophie had predicted, their formation tightening as they adjusted course to intercept us. On the display, they looked small compared to the warships we had seen in the earlier reports of the Voran fleet, but small did not mean harmless. Even a scout ship carried enough firepower to end us in a single exchange, and we had nothing built for a fight. "They are hailing us," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the tension pulling at every word. "Put it through," I said. The voice that came across the channel was mechanical in tone, translated through a system built for efficiency rather than warmth. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted space, claimed under Voran Ascendancy Expansion Protocol. State your designation and purpose, or you will be fired upon." I glanced at Daniel, who kept his hands steady on the controls, ready to move the instant I gave the word. Noah had already begun rerouting extra power into our shields, though we all knew it would not hold against a sustained assault. Grace stood near the doorway, watching me with quiet focus, waiting to see how I would answer. I had exactly one advantage in this moment, and it was not firepower. It was the one thing every species in known space said about humans behind closed doors, usually as a warning rather than a compliment. Humans did not calculate risk the way everyone else did. We were unpredictable, reckless by reputation, and that reputation had kept more than one hostile fleet from pushing us too far, simply because nobody wanted to find out what we might do if cornered. "This is Lieutenant Commander Cale Cole," I said, keeping my voice level, almost bored, as if speaking to an old rival rather than an armed enemy. "We are a single, unarmed escort vessel on a diplomatic supply run. You are welcome to fire on us if you want to explain to your command why you wasted resources destroying a ship carrying nothing but medical supplies and spare parts." There was a pause on the other end, longer than I expected. Diplomatic supply run was, technically, not entirely a lie. We did carry medical supplies. We simply had not mentioned who they were intended for or what we planned to do once we arrived. "Your trajectory does not match a supply route," the voice replied. "You are heading directly toward the blockade perimeter surrounding a contested world." "We are heading toward the nearest relay station for resupply," I said. "If your blockade happens to be sitting on the most efficient route, that is your problem, not mine. I would be happy to file a formal complaint with my superiors about the inconvenience, if that would help." Grace, standing just behind me, pressed a hand briefly to her mouth, clearly holding back a reaction that would not have helped our case if the Voran scout ships could see inside our bridge. Another pause, longer this time. I imagined, somewhere on the other end of that channel, a Voran officer weighing the strange, almost casual confidence in my voice against the reports his command had surely received about human behavior in tense situations. Humans bluffed, humans lied. But humans also occasionally did exactly what they claimed they would, simply out of stubbornness, and that unpredictability was worth more to me in that moment than any weapon we could have carried. "You will halt your current course," the voice said, "and submit to inspection." "We will not," I said, "because inspection will delay our supply run, and delaying a supply run, carrying medical materials, tends to draw attention from exactly the kind of oversight committees your command does not want investigating why a peaceful vessel was harassed in neutral space." It was not entirely true. There was no oversight committee waiting to investigate anything. But the Voran did not know that, and bureaucratic threats, I had learned, worked on nearly every species in the galaxy, because nearly every species feared paperwork almost as much as they feared open conflict. The channel went quiet for a moment, and I watched the scout formation on our display, waiting to see whether my bluff had worked, or whether we were about to find out exactly how much firepower 3 small ships could bring to bear on something as fragile as us. Then, slowly, the formation shifted, drifting apart just enough to open a path between them. "Proceed," the voice said, clipped and clearly displeased. "Your designation has been logged. Further violations of this perimeter will not be tolerated." "Understood," I said, keeping my tone even, though my pulse had not slowed at all. "Appreciate your cooperation." The channel closed, and for a long moment, nobody on the bridge said anything. Daniel exhaled first, a short, sharp breath that carried more relief than he probably meant to show. "That actually worked," he said, disbelief thick in his voice. "For now," I said. "That was one small patrol. What is waiting closer to the planet will not be as easy to talk past." Grace shook her head slowly, something between a laugh and a nervous breath escaping her. "You told them we would file a complaint about paperwork. It worked, did it not?" "It worked," she admitted, "but only because they have no idea how little backup we actually have." "Then let us hope that confusion holds a little longer," I said, turning back to the display, where the path ahead of us stretched on toward the greater blockade surrounding the Etheri homeworld. We pressed forward, and the deeper we moved into contested space, the more the true scale of the Voran presence became clear. What had been a handful of scout ships near the outer perimeter grew, gradually, into something far larger. Warships hung in formation across the system, arranged with careful, practiced discipline, forming a barrier around the planet that looked less like a blockade and more like a cage. Sophie's voice carried a new edge of concern as she studied the readings. "Kale, this is not a small operation. I am counting at least 30 vessels in the immediate area, and that is only what we can detect from this distance. There could be more further in." I studied the formation for a long moment, feeling the weight of what we were about to attempt settle fully for the first time. Talking our way past a handful of scouts was one thing. Slipping past an organized, disciplined siege fleet was something else entirely. "We are not going to fight our way through that," Noah said quietly. "Even if we wanted to, we do not have the firepower." "We are not fighting through it," I said. "We are going around it." Daniel pulled up a secondary display, tracing a path along the outer edge of the system, far from the main concentration of Voran ships. "There is a debris field here, remains of an old asteroid mining operation, based on the readings. Dense enough to mask our approach if we move carefully. It would take us longer, and it would be dangerous to navigate at speed, but it might keep us hidden from most of their sensors." "How dangerous?" Grace asked. "Dangerous enough that most ships would not attempt it," Daniel admitted, "which is exactly why it might work. Nobody expects an unarmed escort vessel to fly through a debris field instead of turning back." I thought about the reputation that had gotten us past the scout formation only minutes earlier. Humans did not calculate risk the way everyone else did. Perhaps it was time to prove that reputation true, not through bluffing this time, but through action. "Plot the course," I said. "We go through the debris field." Daniel's hands moved quickly across the controls, and I felt the ship shift beneath us as we adjusted heading, angling away from the main blockade and toward the jagged, scattered remains of what had once been a mining operation, now nothing more than broken rock and metal drifting silently in the dark. The first stretch of the debris field passed slowly, chunks of rock the size of small buildings tumbling past our viewport, close enough that I found myself holding my breath more than once as Daniel guided us between them with careful, practiced precision. Every alert from our proximity sensors made my chest tighten, but Daniel never wavered, adjusting our course again and again with a calm focus that reminded me exactly why I trusted him at the helm. "We are halfway through," Sophie reported, her voice tight with concentration as she monitored our sensors for any sign that the Voran fleet had noticed our approach. Then, without warning, a proximity alert blared across the bridge, sharp and sudden, and Daniel's hands moved instantly across the controls. "Debris ahead, larger than the rest," he said, "adjusting course." The ship lurched slightly as we banked hard, narrowly avoiding a jagged chunk of rock that filled the entire viewport for a heartbeat before sliding past us into the dark. My hands gripped the edge of my console, knuckles white, though I said nothing, trusting Daniel to guide us through. "Sophie," I said, once the ship steadied again, "any sign we have been detected?" She studied her console for a long moment before answering, and that pause alone made my stomach twist with dread. "Not yet," she said finally, "but we are getting close to the edge of the debris field. Once we clear it, we will be visible again, and this time we will be much closer to the main blockade. I nodded, watching the display as the scattered rock and metal around us began to thin, revealing, beyond it, the full and staggering scale of the fleet surrounding the Etheri homeworld. Dozens of Voran warships hung in formation, and beyond them, faint but visible, the outline of the planet itself, still intact, still holding on. "We made it through," Noah said quietly, though there was no relief in his voice, only the sober understanding of what still lay ahead of us. "We made it through the easy part," I corrected. "Now we have to get past that fleet, reach the surface, and get people out, all without them realizing what we are doing, until it is already done." Grace stepped closer to my station, her expression steady despite everything. "And if they realize before then?" I looked at the display one last time, at the warships standing between us and a planet full of people who had been begging for help since before we ever left friendly space. "Then we will deal with that when it happens," I said, "but we are not turning back." Nobody argued, nobody hesitated. Daniel adjusted our course one final time, angling us toward the outer edge of the blockade, toward the narrow, dangerous path that stood between us and the people we had crossed the galaxy to save. The plan we settled on was simple in idea and terrifying in practice. We would not attempt to break through the main blockade directly. Instead, we would slip along the outer edge of the formation, using the same reckless confidence that had carried us past the scout ships, and aim for a narrow gap where two patrol routes overlapped just long enough to leave a brief, unguarded window near the planet's southern hemisphere. Sophie had pulled the pattern from hours of careful sensor tracking, watching how the Voran ships rotated their positions with disciplined, predictable timing. It was the kind of precision that made them dangerous in open conflict, but it also made them easy to study, and study was exactly what we had spent the last several hours doing while creeping through the debris field. "The gap opens for roughly 6 minutes," Sophie said, tracing the pattern on the display for the rest of us to see. "After that, the patrol rotation closes it again for nearly an hour." 6 minutes to cross an entire blockade line," Daniel said, exhaling slowly. "No pressure." "We do not need 6 minutes to cross the blockade," I said. "We need 6 minutes to get close enough to the surface that their sensors lose track of us in the atmosphere. After that, it becomes a different kind of problem." Grace had already changed into a lightweight suit built for surface work, medical kit strapped across her back, ready to move the moment we landed. "And once we are down there," she said, "how many people are we even able to bring back?" It was the question none of us had a clean answer for. Our ship was small, built for escort duty, not evacuation. We had space for supplies, for a handful of passengers in an emergency, but nothing close to what an entire city might need. "We cannot save everyone," I said, and saying it out loud felt like swallowing something sharp. "But we can save the ones closest to where we land, and we can make sure whoever is left has a better chance of surviving until more help arrives." "If more help arrives," Noah muttered. I did not answer that, because I did not know, and false comfort would not have helped any of us focus on what came next. Daniel guided the ship carefully along the outer edge of the blockade, timing our approach with Sophie's countdown ticking steadily in the background. My pulse matched every second of it, sharp and quick, and I forced myself to breathe slow, deliberate breaths, the same way I had trained myself to do years ago before every difficult mission. "Gap opens in 30 seconds, Sophie said. The ship's engines hummed louder as Daniel prepared for the burst of speed we would need the moment that window appeared. I gripped the edge of my console, watching the formation ahead of us shift with careful precision, exactly as predicted. 10 seconds. Grace steadied herself near the doorway. Noah's hands hovered over the shield controls, ready to reroute power the instant we needed it. "Now," Sophie said. Daniel pushed the engines forward, and the ship surged ahead, cutting through the narrow gap in the blockade formation with a speed that pressed me back against my seat. Warning alerts flared briefly across two of the nearby Voran ships, brief flashes of attention that vanished as quickly as they appeared. our timing narrow enough to slip past before their sensors fully registered our presence. "We are through," Daniel said, voice tight with focus. "Entering atmosphere in 20 seconds. The ship shuddered as we broke into the planet's atmosphere, the smooth quiet of open space replaced by the low, steady roar of air resistance against our hull. Below us, through the haze of smoke rising from distant fires, I caught my first real look at the Etheri homeworld, and it took everything in me not to let the sight break my focus entirely. Entire sections of the nearest city had been reduced to rubble. Streets that must have once been full of quiet, ordinary life now stood empty, save for scattered groups of Etheri civilians moving in careful, frightened clusters, searching for shelter that no longer existed in most places. "There," Grace said, pointing toward a cluster of survivors gathered near what remained of a large structure, its outer walls collapsed, but its lower levels apparently still standing. "That looks like some kind of shelter." Daniel angled the ship toward the location, easing us down through the smoke-filled air until we found a clear stretch of open ground nearby. The moment we landed, Grace was moving, medical kit in hand, out through the hatch before the engines had even fully powered down. I followed close behind her, Noah and Daniel taking positions near the ship to keep it ready for a fast departure the moment we needed one. The Etheri survivors reacted to our arrival with a mixture of confusion and cautious hope, their large, expressive eyes darting between us and the ship behind us, clearly trying to understand who we were and why we had come. One of them, an elder with silver markings along the side of her face, stepped forward slowly. "You are human," she said, her translated voice carrying quiet disbelief. "The Concord sent you." "No," I said, deciding honesty was the only thing that made sense in this moment. "We came on our own. We do not have much room, and we cannot fight off that fleet up there, but we can get some of you somewhere safer, and we can send back word of exactly what is happening here." The elder studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly, turning to speak quickly to the others gathered around her. Grace was already moving among them, checking for injuries, offering what medical help she could to those who needed it most urgently. We worked as fast as we could, loading those most in need onto the ship, elderly Etheri who could not travel far on their own, children separated from their families, anyone whose injuries required immediate care beyond what we could offer on the ground. Every space we filled meant someone else would have to wait for a rescue that might never come, and that knowledge sat heavy in my chest with every trip back to the ship. Then Sophie's voice crackled through my comm unit, sharp with urgency. "Kale, we have a problem. Voran ground forces have been deployed nearby. They are moving toward your position." I turned to Grace, who was helping an injured Etheri child toward the ship's open hatch. "How many more can we fit?" "2, maybe 3 at most," she said, not looking up from her work. "Make it happen fast," I said, turning back toward the elder who had first approached us. "We need to move, now." The elder nodded, calling out quickly to the remaining survivors, directing the most vulnerable toward the ship, while the rest began moving away from the open ground, seeking whatever cover remained nearby. That was when the first shots rang out in the distance, sharp and sudden, cutting through the smoke-filled air. I turned toward the sound, heart pounding, and saw a group of Voran soldiers advancing along a broken street just beyond the collapsed structure, their weapons raised toward the fleeing civilians. "Grace, get them on board," I shouted. "Daniel, prep for immediate takeoff." I moved without thinking, placing myself between the advancing soldiers and the last group of Etheri civilians still crossing the open ground toward our ship. I had no weapon capable of matching theirs, nothing but the same reckless confidence that had carried us this far, and in that moment, it felt like the only thing I had left to offer. "This world is under Voran authority," one of the soldiers called out, voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Stand aside." "No," I said, and though my voice shook slightly, I did not step back. The soldier raised his weapon higher, and for one long, terrifying moment, I genuinely believed that decision would be the last one I ever made. Then, from behind me, Noah's voice cut through the tension, sharp and urgent. "Kale, down!" I dropped instinctively, and a burst of defensive fire from our ship's outer turret streaked overhead, forcing the advancing soldiers to scatter for cover rather than press their advance. It bought us precious seconds, nothing more, but seconds were exactly what we needed. "Move!" I shouted to the last of the fleeing civilians, and they surged past me toward the ship's open hatch, Grace pulling them aboard as quickly as she could manage. I turned to follow, and that was when the impact hit. Something struck the ground near my feet, close enough that the force of it threw me sideways, pain flaring bright and sudden through my shoulder as I hit the dirt hard. For a moment, the world tilted, sound muffled and distant, and I genuinely was not certain I would be able to get back up. Then Grace was there, pulling me upright with strength I did not know she had, half dragging me the remaining distance toward the ship, while Noah continued laying down covering fire from the turret above. "I have got you," she said, voice tight with focus rather than panic. "Keep moving." We reached the hatch together, and Daniel had the engines already roaring the moment we were aboard, the ship lifting off the ground before the hatch had even fully sealed behind us. I collapsed against the wall of the cargo bay, pain radiating through my shoulder, watching through the narrowing gap of the closing hatch as the planet's smoke-filled surface fell away beneath us. We had not saved everyone. We had not even come close. But as I looked around the cramped cargo bay, filled with Yathiri survivors, children clinging to elders, quiet relief slowly replacing the fear on their faces, I understood that we had saved something, and in a moment like this, something was far more than nothing. Grace knelt beside me, already assessing the injury to my shoulder with quick, practiced hands. "You are going to be fine," she said, "but you are going to feel this for a while." I managed a short laugh despite the pain. "Add it to the list." That was when Sophie's voice came through again, tense and urgent. "Kale, we have a bigger problem. A Voran command vessel is hailing us directly, and it is not one of the scout ships this time." I pulled myself upright despite the pain, moving toward the bridge as quickly as I could manage. "Put it through." The voice that came across the channel was different from before, calm, measured, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Human vessel," the voice said, "you have caused significant disruption to a controlled operation. Explain yourself, or face immediate consequences." I steadied myself against the console, ignoring the pain still radiating through my shoulder, and answered with the same steady confidence I had used since the moment this entire mission began. "We came for people who needed help," I said. "Nothing more." There was a long pause on the other end, longer than any pause we had encountered before, and somewhere in that silence, I understood that whatever happened next would decide far more than just our fate. The silence stretched long enough that I began to wonder if the channel had closed entirely, but then the voice returned, quieter this time, though no less commanding. "You are the vessel that crossed our blockade line," the voice said. "Alone, unarmed, without authorization from your own governing council. Your actions have no strategic value. You cannot save this world, yet you came anyway. I find that curious." "We did not come to save the world," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the ache still spreading through my shoulder. "We came to save who we could. That is different, and it is enough for us." Another pause followed, and I imagined, somewhere aboard that command vessel, a Voran officer studying our small, battered ship on his display, trying to understand a decision that made no sense within the framework his people use to measure risk and reward. "I am Commander Threll," the voice said finally, "of the Voran Ascendancy Fleet stationed at this position. I have reviewed your vessel's specifications. You possess minimal offensive capability. Your continued presence here serves no tactical purpose, and yet you remain." "We are not staying to fight," I said. "We are leaving, but we are leaving with the people we came for, and I would rather you understood that clearly before deciding what to do next." "You misunderstand my intention," Threll said, and something in his tone shifted slightly, enough that I noticed it even through the flat translation of our systems. "I do not intend to destroy your vessel." Whatever I had expected him to say, it was not that. I exchanged a quick glance with Sophie, who looked equally uncertain, her hands hovering near her console, as if waiting for the moment this turned out to be some kind of trick. "Why not?" I asked, deciding directness was the only reasonable response left to me. "Because your actions, while strategically meaningless, have created a complication I did not anticipate," Threll said. "Every ship in this system, including my own crew, has now witnessed a single, unarmed vessel cross an active blockade line to retrieve civilians your own council refused to protect. That is not a story that remains contained, Commander. It will spread, regardless of what I do next." I said nothing, waiting to see where this was leading. "If I destroy your vessel now," Threll continued, "I create a martyr's story, one that will only strengthen resistance against this operation. If I allow you to leave unharmed, I create a different kind of story, one that suggests even the Voran ascendancy recognizes when an act of desperation should not be met with further violence. Neither outcome benefits my objectives directly, but one causes considerably less disruption than the other." "So you are letting us go because it is convenient for you," I said, unable to keep a trace of disbelief from my voice. "I am letting you go," Threll said, "because I have calculated that doing so costs me less than the alternative. Do not mistake this for mercy, Commander. It is simply mathematics." I thought about arguing the point further, about pushing him to admit there might be something beyond calculation behind his decision, but I stopped myself. It did not matter why he was letting us leave. It only mattered that he was. "Understood," I said instead. "For whatever it is worth, Commander, I hope this operation ends before it costs more lives than it already has." There was another pause, shorter this time, before Threll responded. "That outcome depends entirely on decisions made far above my position, Commander. I suspect you understand that concern better than most." The channel closed without further exchange, and for a long moment, nobody on the bridge said anything at all. "Did that actually just happen?" Daniel asked finally, disbelief thick in his voice. "It happened," Sophie confirmed, still staring at her console, as if expecting the Voran commander to reconsider at any moment. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension finally begin to loosen from my shoulders, though the ache in my injured arm remained sharp and insistent. "Get us out of this system," I said, "before he changes his mind about the mathematics." Daniel wasted no time setting our course away from the blockade, and this time, no scout ships intercepted us. No warning hails demanded we halt. We slipped past the edge of the Voran fleet and back into open space, the Etheri homeworld shrinking behind us, until it became nothing more than a distant point of light. In the cargo bay, Grace worked steadily among the survivors we had managed to bring aboard, tending to injuries, offering quiet reassurance in a language most of them barely understood but seemed to find comforting anyway. I made my way back to check on them once my own injury had been properly treated, moving carefully through the crowded space until I found the elder who had first approached us on the surface. She looked up as I approached, her expression difficult to read through features so different from my own, though something in her posture suggested exhaustion mixed with cautious relief. "You risked everything for us," she said, "people you had never met, a species your own council decided was not worth the trouble." "Some of us disagreed with that decision," I said. "Clearly," she said, and something in her tone might have been the Etheri equivalent of a tired smile. "I do not know how to repay a debt like this." "You do not owe us anything," I said. "We did what we believed was right. That is enough." She studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "Your council will not see it that way." I thought about my sister, standing alone on that platform, casting the single vote in favor of intervention while 14 others turned away. I thought about what waited for us once we returned to Concord space, the questions we would have to answer, the consequences we would likely face for breaking protocol so completely. "No," I admitted, "they probably will not. But that does not change what we did here today, and it does not change the fact that I would make the same decision again if given the choice." The elder nodded slowly, then reached out, resting one long, delicate hand briefly against my uninjured shoulder in a gesture that felt, despite everything different between our two species, unmistakably grateful. "Then perhaps," she said, "your council needs to hear that from you directly." I looked around the cargo bay, at the survivors we had managed to save, at Grace, still working carefully among them, at Noah, checking the ship's systems for any lingering damage, at Daniel guiding us steadily toward home. We had lost people today. We had not saved everyone, but we had proven something that mattered, something I intended to make sure the Concord could not simply ignore or explain away. "I intend to," I said, "whatever it costs." The elder studied me a moment longer before nodding again, and as our ship continued its journey away from the Etheri system, I found myself thinking not about the consequences waiting for us back home, but about the 6 minutes it had taken to cross a blockade nobody thought we could cross, and the single decision that had made everything after it possible. We had answered a call the rest of the galaxy chose to ignore. Whatever came next, I would not regret that. By the time we reached the outer edge of Concord space, word of what we had done had already spread far beyond anything I expected. Every relay station we passed carried some version of the story, twisted and reshaped by each retelling, but the core of it remained the same everywhere we went. A single, unarmed human vessel had crossed an active blockade line to rescue civilians the Galactic Concord had refused to protect. Sophie kept a careful eye on the growing chatter across public channels as we approached, her expression shifting between disbelief and quiet satisfaction with each new report. "This is everywhere," she said. "Every major relay in Concord space is carrying some version of what happened. People are asking why the Concord did nothing, and why it took an unauthorized crew to do what 14 votes refused to approve." "That is not going to make the council happy," Noah said, though there was no regret in his voice. "No," I agreed, "it is not." We were met at the edge of Concord territory by an official escort, 3 ships bearing the insignia of Concord security, their presence a clear and deliberate message that our actions had not gone unnoticed. I had expected as much, and I met the summons that followed with the same steady calm I had carried through every moment since we first broke formation days earlier. The Concord chamber looked exactly as it had in the recordings I had watched before we left. Tall glass walls curving upward into a domed ceiling, rows of seats rising around a central platform. This time, however, I stood on that platform myself, my crew seated behind me, the weight of dozens of watching delegates pressing down with an intensity I had not fully prepared for. My sister stood near the front row, her expression carefully neutral, though I caught the faintest flicker of something proud in her eyes as I took my position at the center of the chamber. The presiding delegate regarded me with the same calm, measured tone I remembered from the earlier recording, though something in his posture suggested this conversation would carry more weight than the one that had come before it. "Commander Cole," he said, "you and your crew acted in direct violation of Concord Protocol, crossing into contested space without authorization, engaging in conduct that could have provoked a significant escalation with the Voran ascendancy. Explain your actions." I had rehearsed several versions of this moment during the long journey home, but standing there, facing the full weight of the council, I found the truth was simpler than anything I had prepared. A planet full of people who had never harmed anyone begged this council for help, I said, and this council chose caution over their lives. My crew and I chose differently. We did not have the authority to act, so we acted without it, because waiting for permission would have meant watching an entire species disappear while we debated procedure. A murmur passed through the chamber, quieter this time than the one that had followed my sister's earlier plea, though I could not tell whether it carried agreement or disapproval. "Your actions bypassed proper channels entirely," another delegate said, the same silver-limbed representative who had spoken against intervention before. "Regardless of outcome, this sets a dangerous precedent. If individual crews decide unilaterally when to act against Concord decisions, the entire structure of this council becomes meaningless." "With respect," I said. The structure of this council meant nothing to the people dying on that planet, while 14 votes decided their fate did not matter enough to risk anything for. I am not here to argue that structure does not matter. I am here to tell you that when structure fails people who have nowhere else to turn, someone has to be willing to act anyway. The presiding delegate studied me for a long moment before speaking again, his tone shifting slightly, less rehearsed than before. You brought survivors back with you, living proof of both the situation on that planet and the consequences of this council's inaction. I did, I said, because I believed this council needed to see the cost of its own decision, not just hear it described in a report. At that moment, the elder who had first approached us on the ethereal surface stepped forward from where she had been waiting quietly at the edge of the chamber, her presence drawing immediate attention from every delegate present. She had insisted on making this journey herself, despite everything she had already survived, determined to speak for her people in a room that had once decided their fate without ever hearing directly from them. I would like to address this council, she said, her translated voice carrying clearly across the chamber, if that is permitted. The presiding delegate hesitated only briefly before nodding. Speak. My people called for help, she said. 14 votes decided we were not worth the risk. 1 vote disagreed, and when your council turned away, it was not your soldiers, nor your fleets, nor your laws that answered our call. It was a single ship, crewed by people who had no obligation to help us, who risked everything they had built within this council to do what this chamber refused to do. She paused, letting her words settle across the room before continuing. I do not know what your laws say about what Commander Cole and his crew did, but I know what would have happened to my people without them. I know how many more of us would have died waiting for a vote that never came, and I believe this council owes them more than judgment for breaking your rules. It owes them gratitude for remembering what those rules were meant to protect in the first place. The chamber fell silent, and for the first time since I had entered that room, I saw something shift across the faces of the delegates watching, discomfort giving way, slowly, to something closer to reflection. My sister stepped forward then, taking her place beside me on the platform, her voice carrying the same steady conviction I remembered from the earlier recording. This council has a choice to make, she said. It can punish my brother and his crew for acting when this chamber would not, sending a clear message that caution matters more than conscience. Or it can use this moment to ask why 14 votes were willing to let an entire species disappear rather than risk anything to stop it. The presiding delegate exchanged a long look with several of the nearest delegates before speaking again, his tone measured but noticeably less certain than before. This council will need time to consider the full implications of what has occurred here. Take the time you need, I said, but while you consider it, remember that somewhere out there, another call for help may already be going out, and next time, this council will need to decide whether it wants to be remembered for turning away again or for finally choosing to answer. I did not know, standing there, exactly what the council would decide. Perhaps there would be consequences waiting for us, despite everything the ethereal elder and my sister had said. Perhaps there would not. But as I looked around that chamber, at delegates who could no longer pretend the cost of their caution existed only in reports and numbers, I understood that something had shifted, even if it would take time to see exactly how far that shift would carry. In the weeks that followed, the story of what we had done continued to spread, carried across the galaxy by every species that had watched the recordings, read the reports, and heard the ethereal elder's words echo through a chamber built to keep any single voice from rising above the rest. Some called us reckless, others called us heroes. My sister told me, quietly, that both were probably true, and that neither label mattered nearly as much as what we had actually accomplished. The Concord did not formally punish us, though they did not formally celebrate us either. Instead, something quieter happened, something that mattered more than any official statement could have. Other crews from other species began responding faster to distress calls that might once have waited for lengthy votes and careful deliberation. Diplomats who had once championed caution above all else began speaking more carefully about the cost of inaction, aware now that the galaxy was watching more closely than it once had. I stood on the bridge of our ship one evening, weeks after everything had settled, watching the stars stretch out ahead of us as we prepared for our next assignment. Grace worked quietly nearby, restocking medical supplies with the same steady focus she always carried. Noah ran diagnostics without complaint, and Daniel kept one hand resting lightly on the controls, ready for whatever came next. Sophie's voice broke the quiet, calm but carrying a familiar edge of urgency. "Kale, we have an incoming distress call. Different system this time, different species." I turned toward her station, feeling the same tight, familiar tension settle into my chest that I remembered from the very beginning of all of this. "Already?" Daniel asked. "Already," Sophie confirmed. "But this time, it looks like we are not the only ones responding. 2 other fleets have already changed course toward the signal." I felt something ease slightly in my chest at those words, a small but meaningful shift in a galaxy that had once turned away from a call for help without hesitation. "Set our course," I said. "Let us go make sure they do not have to face this one alone either." As our ship moved forward into the dark, joining others who had chosen, this time, to answer rather than wait, I understood that the story of what happened at the Etheri homeworld was no longer just our story. It belonged now to every crew willing to act when caution alone was not enough, and to every voice that refused to stay silent while others needed help most. We had answered a call the galaxy chose to ignore. Now, it seemed, the galaxy was finally learning to answer too.